Will the real Havana Club rum please stand up? There is perhaps no more revered rum brand, but is the Bacardi-made Havana Club that's becoming increasingly available in the U.S. the real deal? Or is it the one actually made in Cuba and could potentially be sold on our shores soon? Joining us to discuss is WSJ's Charles Passy with the Weekend Sip.
Hey,
hi, Charles. So great to see you. And there's actually some news regarding this, some breaking news, rather.
President Obama announced today that he was relaxing certain limitations on what you can bring from Cuba and from other countries of Cuban-made rum and cigars. So as of today, if you go to Canada, you can bring a lot of it with you. If you go to Cuba, you can bring a lot of it with you. It's still
not going to be sold in stores
here.
That's
the big rub, right?
Yes, though. That's why all this legal brouhaha now, because it's coming.
Right.
It's coming.
Absolutely, yeah.
So let's unpack this a little bit. You brought with you the Bacardi-made Havana Club rum. Now, the issue here is that Bacardi didn't even initially have the name Havana Club.
Right.
It belonged to another Cuban rum-making family, the Archibalas.
I think that's how you pronounce it. You might know better, right?
And they let it lapse. They let the trademark lapse in the 70s because they had left Cuba after the Cuban government seized the family's holdings after the revolution and became car salesmen.
Right.
So they thought.
Yeah, I mean, they basically thought the brand was essentially worthless, even though this was one of the most revered brand names in the entire world. They thought it was worthless, and Bacardi said, hey, let's bring back, even though it was not a Bacardi product. So they worked out with the family, since they both had roots in Cuba, to essentially, bring back the brand, using this name, although it was a name that had been lapsed as a trademark.
And the Bacardis did pay the Archibala family something for it.
Right.
They applied to the U.S. trademark. So they own the U.S. trademark.
And they say it is a recipe sort of that comes from them. So they say this has legitimate Cuban authenticity, even though it's made in Puerto Rico.
Right. And going obviously back to the Bacardi family history, Facundo Bacardi is credited with creating the type of Cuban rum that we all know today.
Right. Absolutely. As you say, we were talking a little bit before, the lighter style, which is friendly for mixing. I mean, the modern rum concept of rum, not just Cuban rum really, but the modern concept of rum that we know really comes from Bacardi.
Right. But meanwhile, while all this is going on by Cuban exiles in Miami or in other parts of the world, Puerto Rico, there's a Cuban rum-making business.
Cubans haven't stopped drinking rum.
They haven't stopped drinking it or making it, and then the French got involved in the 90s. Tell us about that.
Right. So Pernod Ricard, which is, I think, the #2 spirits company in the world, basically talked to the Cuban government and said, hey, let's go in business together. Let's put out a Havana Club rum. And that is what they did.
And they pointed to the fact that the trademark was available because it had lapsed in the 70s. So they have a case.
Right. And so they say, you can only say that true Cuban rum comes from Cuba. So they say we have a right to this name, particularly with the trademark issues. Needless to say, this is a huge mess in the courts. This has been dragging out for a few years. There's a lot of back and forth. I looked at the case. It's very complicated.
It's very complicated. And Bacardi is now the largest rum maker in the world, correct? And this Cuban-made, French-made rum is #3 in the world.
Well, I think it's something. It's certainly up there. It's 4 million cases a year, something like that, or
whatever. And that's without access to the U.S. market because of the embargo that was put in place in 1962.
Exactly. So, and when you add in Bacardi's other brands, because Bacardi rum is basically known as Bacardi. This happens to be one they have a different branding of. But when you add in other Bacardi brands, they're ginormous.
Right. But so now the dispute is in a U.S. district court in Washington. It will be interesting to see what happens. Now, you brought with you the Bacardi.
Right.
Because you don't have the Cuban-made rum.
I didn't take a trip to Cuba this past weekend, no. So unfortunately,
Charles. So normally we would do a little taste test to see which one we like better. They've been done before, interestingly, and people have interesting opinions about it. But let's take a taste of this one.
Absolutely.
This is made in Puerto Rico, but based on a Cuban recipe. Well, it tastes good to me.
It's very good. It's a fine sipping rum for its price, which is $22. Be interesting to see what if Pernod ever gets its product in the U.S., what it will retail for.
Because if you buy it in Cuba, it's only something like
it's very cheap.
It's
very cheap. I mean, I would say that, to be honest, I think there are better aged sipping rums on the market, ones that have more age on them and have a little bit of a heftier mouthfeel. But this has some nice notes. I picked up a little bit of dark fruit, a little bit of chocolate, and I should say you can use this as a cocktail. In a cocktail too.
So this is supposed to be a sipping rum, though.
This is a sipping rum, but it can be used in cocktails. The Blanco, the white rum, is really. There are two versions of the product. The white rum is really just for mixing.
You can definitely you can definitely taste the sugar.
Oh, absolutely.
And there are lots of purists who'll say, well, without real Cuban sugar cane, you're not making a Cuban rum.
That is something. I mean, I have had the Cuban-made one, and I thought it was very good. I feel a little unsteady saying, is it better than this one or not? Because I did not compare them side by side.
We may end up just having Havana Club 1 and Havana Club 2.
Who knows what the courts will decide? But in the meanwhile,
let's drink. Cheers. Thank you so much, Charles, for that.